Okay, so for the next part, we're going to look at the Illustrated Parts Catalog, or IPC, and we're gonna use the Cessna 414A. So this again is available on the course e-learning page. Under the content area, Lab 8 Maintenance Publications, we got the 414A IPC right here. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up using on mine just so I can scale it, navigate it a little bit easier on screen here. But too far over. If I can move it off. I moved it just a hair too far. Where can I grab it that won't just open a new tab? I'm gonna have to reopen it. Pull it out. Don't go too far. Okay. Make this small. Open that. Pop it out. There we go. Now we'll go off the edge of the page. And then I can bring this back up again. Okay, so here is our IPC, and the IPC, once again, is you see this one originally from October 1982, but it was revised in May 2008, so it's a modern IPC. It's going to be organized by ATA code. Again, an introduction explains kind of the different, how things work. So a few things I want to point out in here. Let me make this bigger so that we can kind of see the IPC is generally broken down into two main sections once we get into it. There is a parts index where it basically has every part organized by part number. And then we have the Illustrated Parts Catalog where we have diagrams of each section of the aircraft with arrows pointing to the parts, then those correspond to a list of parts in that diagram. So if you know a part number and want to look it up, you can go that route. If you're like looking at the airplane and there's a part you're trying to find, you can find the diagram that corresponds to that part and then move forward. So I'll kind of show you how we navigate those two ways. There are effectivities. So over time, planes are built with different parts, or there might be a change to it. And sometimes it's minor, but rather than making a whole separate diagram or something, it may just be they change a part number. So there will be a column on the right side when we get down into it that show the effectivities. And it'll say, for instance, the example here, number 001 and dash 0023. So everything between 1 through 23 would be effective there. And then there may be a slightly different part that's maybe aircraft 24 and on. And sometimes they're not consecutive. You may have like one part that's on aircraft 1, 3, 5, and 7, and a different part that's on aircraft 2, 4, 6, and 8, or some kind of thing. So you really have to pay attention to effectivity. When I was working at an airline with airliners, we had aircraft that our company had ordered. We had aircraft we bought on the used market. We had aircraft we leased from other vendors. And there sometimes were different options in different aircraft. And so, based on the serial number of the aircraft, there were all kinds of effectivity codes that you had to pay attention to. And in fact, we had aircraft that were operated, being a regional, we operated aircraft for Delta and for United and American and for Alaska and for, at one time, U.S. Airways before they merged with American. Every one of them had different interiors and different layouts. And so that kind of stuff, right, there were different effectivities based on that. So you had to be very careful with that. It tells where you can get them. Most, again, are online. But nomenclature, so they indent items. And so when we get down into the IPC, so you can see here they have columns for the different items. So in a picture, it'll show item 1, item 2, item 3, the different items. And sometimes they're part of other items. And so that's where you get this kind of cascading. And I'll point that out when we get down. Let me go down to a diagram and I can kind of show you it. So if I get down to a diagram and I look at the parts that go along with it, they're talking about the cascading here. So it's figure 7 and then the items 1, all these items. But then if one of these has sub-assembly parts, it might be further indented. This one's not a great example. It doesn't have it. But yeah, I'm just trying to find one that shows some sub-assembly stuff going on. They're not super common, but they can be, oh, I think I saw one a second ago. They can be several levels deep, particularly when you start getting down into like engines and stuff. So down in the 70s, let me see here. I really don't have a good sub-assemblies. I know there's a couple that we'll run into when we're going through the lab here. So other things you'll have are, here's those part numbers. There's a part number column. And then it kind of shows some additional indenting, right? And then effectivity over here. And then units per assembly, how many you need in an assembly. And sometimes assemblies have more than one. So here there are 2 clips used with an air conditioning installation. So, but just kind of continuing to go through that introduction, some of the other items to know. Down here, there will be part numbers, and oftentimes you'll have a part number with a dash, so there may be a modification to a part number, and many times those modifications are effective on certain serial numbers. It might be an upgrade for the entire fleet, or it may be an upgrade with later serial numbers, so you got to pay attention to that kind of thing. And then here it talks about the ATA chapter numbering, so chapter, section, section, subsystem, and then subject or unit. And then we also have figure numbers, page numbers, and revision dates, so stuff to keep in mind there. Down here, number 16 here, abbreviations commonly used. These are important because they are the abbreviations that will be used specifically in here. For certain things. So alt means alternate, for instance, as required. If you look at like a quantity, sometimes maybe you have to shim something, and it'll say, it won't say 1 shim or 2 shims or 3 shims, it'll say AR. So you have to shim it to get a certain gap or a certain stack height, something like that. So that's where you'll see AR in the required column. If it's an assembly, IPC we talked about, NP is non-procurable. Sometimes it'll show sub-assembly parts, things that go into a bigger item, and certain parts will say NP. It means you can't get just those parts. You have to get the entire assembly that they're part of. Reference only, RF, and then it goes to the next page here, bulk items for spares order. So it may have a different part number in production, and then you're ordering. Most of the time we're ordering spares. Most of the parts are the same, but every once in a while it's different. Figure can be shortened to FIG. SB, we've heard of service bulletin, temporary revision, and then when exhausted use, that's another one where you'll have 2 part numbers for the same part, and it's just like some kind of an upgrade, but it's a minor upgrade. It doesn't really have a performance change, or it isn't affected by an AD. So when exhausted used is use the older part until it's gone, and then start using the newer part when it's exhausted, right? So you may as well, it's basically use up the old stock. You don't have to throw them away or replace them, just use them when they run out. So want to kind of remember that. So in the introduction, page 4 is where we have those. So if you need to go back and reference those. Here's where it kind of lays out that, and talks about those different areas. So up above, where section 1, 2, 3, 4, it was showing this here. So if you're kind of want to review that, you can. And then it kind of talks more about things like bulk items, interchangeable. Service letters and service kits. If you have a service letter or a service bulletin or an AD, oftentimes you'll be issued a kit. And so it talks about kits here. They'll put those kits in if there's like an upgrade kit or an AD kit, those will kind of be upgraded or be noted in the IPC, and that kind of thing. So, and it talks about all the different parts. So here's when we get into an IPC, what it looks like. So you're going to have, this is that part number index I was talking about. You'll have pages that look like this. So if you have a part number, you can see this is the example they give. If you have a part number, it's shown here. They're in numerical, alphabetical order. It tells you where you can find it if you want to see the diagram and what the item number is in that diagram and how many are required. Okay, so if you have a part, you can't figure out where it came from, but it has a part number on it. Sometimes, this is helpful. The other side of it then is this is the pages. You almost always have 2 pages for the pictorial representation. So here's the list that goes along with the pictorial representation here. So in this case, item number 1 is pointing to this kind of bar right over here. If we go up here to item 1, it shows, this is figure, and this is a figure number. Sometimes there's more than one figure for a given component. So figure 1, item 1, so we've got figure 1, item 1, and it's the nose landing gear retraction linkage. And then that might be made up of more than one part, like it might have rod ends screwed in the end or bearings or stuff like that. So it's actually saying there's further detail. You can refer to a different section or figure in order to see more detail of what's going on with that part. But if you need the entire thing, sometimes it'll list part number. So you can see there's no part number listed for it. Further down, we'll say like part number 5 here, it lists a part number. It's a bearing assembly. We can go down and look and see is part number 5. I think it might be a sub-assembly, so it may not show right here. 4A is a dash. The dash means something is not shown, okay? So, some items may not show up. So sometimes you're like, well, I know it's there, but it doesn't, and it skips a couple numbers, so you can kind of look between the numbers to find it. And so, and then there's also this alphabetical index by like what it is. You can see like oil cooler and baffle, oil pressure indicating, oil pressure system, right? So we also have an alphabetical index that goes along with it. And then here are those different kit numbers. So there's a kit number list, where to find them, who supplies them, supplier addresses. So if you're trying to find a part, you can't. Most of the time we order parts through part supply warehouses like Aircraft Spruce or Boeing Supply or Textron parts, right? But if you're having trouble finding something, they list all the original, who made the different parts here, and there's a code here you can look up in order to figure out who made a part. So here we get into that alphabetical index, which then can tell us where we want to go, chapter, section, subject, and then figure number, and then item. Allows us to find stuff that way. And that is, you do have to know how it's worded. Does it start with, like here, bracket, parking brake control, right? So it's kind of what you don't see there. What that really is a parking brake control bracket. But because they'll often start with that keyword for like what type of a part it is. So it's a better way to kind of think about it is like bracket, comma, parking brake control. Because you can see there's also a bracket, comma, oxygen control, and bracket, comma, compass mount. Right, so if you tried to look up the compass mount bracket under C's, you're not going to find it because it's under the B's for the bracket. So sometimes it can be a little tricky trying to find stuff in that index. Search, again, most of these documents are searchable, so we have that as a possibility. But there's multiple ways to get to anything. I'm going to zoom out for a minute here. So, let's look at the lab and some of the stuff that we're trying to find here. So if we want to the first part here is looking at so Cessna 414 Illustrated Parts Catalog. We want to find a brake lining, part number 6633. So there's a couple ways we can do that. What route do you want to try first? What do you think we can do? So we have a part number. So which section can we go to if we have a part number? Remember, we've got a part number index where it's ordered by that. So if we go to the part number index, I'm going to turn off scrolling real quick so I can get through these a little quicker. So if I go to the part number index, which is right after that, right after the alphabetical index, we have our part number index. I'm going to make this a little wider. Go fit to width. Okay. You can see they start with pound signs and then they go to zeros, right? 00 before 01 is before 02 is before 03. And it ignores things like dashes, right? So 01, 21, and then 01. Sorry, it doesn't ignore dashes. The dashes come after 02, Yeah, it ignores the dashes, excuse me. 0206, right, is before 0222 here. So if we want to find that brake lining, where do we need to go to? What do we need to scroll to in here? What's the part number? 6633. So if we scroll down, you can see there's a lot of parts that start with zeros. A lot of parts start with zeros. I'm going to go to page down. It was a lot easier. You know, and then we get to ones. And where do you think the stuff, if something starts with a letter, where do you think those show up? After the numbers, yeah. So numbers always come before letters. But now we're in the fives. And what you'll see is, like, here you can see there's a lot of part numbers that start with 511. Certain manufacturers, specifically for certain models of aircraft, will have like a lot of part numbers where they like to use the same the same codes. And so this 511, I know, is a comment on these Pipers. They really like to start stuff with 51, 511, Whereas there may not be as many. You can see I jumped right over the sixes because the 6 part numbers are actually more common for Parker, who makes these, Parker Aerospace. Let me see. So if I get into the sixes here, I've got 6, 2, and these are kind of they're alphabetical, numerical, then alphabetical from left to right. So it's a little bit different way of looking at numbers for some people, but it helps. It makes sense because you can kind of look at just the left column, then start looking, one number over, and then start looking one number over, rather than it's not ordered like 1, 2, like the number 10, right, is going to come after, the number 10 isn't going to come after 9, it's going to come after the ones, right? 10 would be after 1, because that way you can just look at the first number. And that's another way, like when you go into like a store as a stocking area, most aircraft facility stocking areas use the same numbering as well. So if you're like trying to find a part number on a shelf, it doesn't go like if you had items 1 through 20, it wouldn't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It would be 1, 10, 11, 12, yeah, right. So, 1, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, or 2, 20, right? So you got to work from left to right. And that's why these are all, you can see they're left justified. So it's easier to look at the, versus the right justified, what we're used to. So they're left justified, you look from the first number, you basically read them from left to right. So they're not in ascending numerical order, they're in ascending order from left to right. So, we need to get to the 6 sixes, so 6 fours, and then I go up here, 6 5. So right here we have 66-33, and it gives us a few things that we can fill in there. So it tells us what IPC page number that is. So our IPC, right, the page number, where we're going to find this, is 324000, right? That's the chapter, the subsection, and subject. And then the 01 at the end, that is the chapter, section, subject, and then that's the figure number, figure 01. And then in that figure, it is item 31. So if we, it tells us figure number, it doesn't tell us the specific page number though. So we still have to kind of figure that out. So for like here, we know it's going to be in 32-40-00. It doesn't tell us what page it's on yet. And we need to fill that in still. But we do know the figure number. It's going to be in figure number 01, right? And it says lining item number. Our item number there is 031 or 31. But this doesn't tell us effectivity, but it does tell us number of linings required. So we need 6 of those per assembly. So we got most of it. We still need these page numbers here, and we still need this effectivity. So we're going to have to go to that diagram in order to see it. So let's jump. We were in the part number index. Past the part number index, we get into the actual diagram. So I'm going to pull down a little bit. And if I zoom this out to the page level, you can see we are starting with, I jumped past a lot of the, so we start with 11, marking suppliers. Why don't we have 1 through 10? Why is there nothing here for 1 through 10? What were ATA codes 1 through 10? Or 5 through 10, really, that we use? What are the early ATA codes below 11? What are they reserved for? Look on your ATA chart. What do you notice about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8?
A lot of it's basic operations.
They're like operations, inspections, right? It's not parts of the airplane. It's nothing we're changing specifically. Like 5 tells us what the inspection intervals are and what our inspections are for our 100-hour and that kind of thing, right? So it makes sense that the IPC really doesn't have anything before that. So if we get to 3240, which I'm just going to drag until I get into the 30s, there's 3230. Oops. Oh, it jumped. Why did it go to 11? It jumped back. Let's get back to the 30s. 32s. Okay, 33s. I'm going to just go there. And I'm going to jump up. If I go back to 32, right? You can see there's a lot of 32s because there's a lot of bits and pieces that go into landing gear. But if I go to the 3240 that I found, okay, 3240 starts right here. So you can see 3240 starts with figure number 1, with a wheel, right? It shows a wheel. So here's our tire, wheel assembly, bearings, different spacers. And then down here, this is a brake disc and bits and pieces of the brake. Now, I can look at this and I can tell you, I think the lining is probably 32, maybe 31, 30, right? Just looking at it from knowledge. But you guys know, we looked at that other part number index, and we know it's item number 32 there. All right, so we can, or sorry, it is 31. I don't know, I'm thinking. 32 is a spacer, I believe. But item 31 is the lining. So, just kind of looking at it, you can kind of guess what some of the stuff is. So you can see this is 324000. If I zoom in, it's 324000. The diagram here is on, the diagram's on, is figure 01, and it's page 1. But this diagram doesn't really tell us anything other than kind of a pictorial, right? We have to find out, we have to look at what 31 is. And so if you go to the next page, this is, you can see it still says figure 01, but it's page 2 of chapter 3240. And this is where it lists all the items. So the brake lining, the 6633, if we go down to item 31, is shown right here. Right? And so so pages, it's on 2 pages. We need both these pages in order to see it. We need page 1 and 2 in 324000. If I keep going in 3240, so page 3, there's a few more items for figure 1. We're still on figure 1 up here. But if I go to page 3, which is 324000 figure 2, it actually starts over at page 1 because this is page 1 of figure 2. Which is a different style of brake. This is a floating disc brake instead of a Cleveland style disc brake. So, and the disc here keys into the wheel rather than being bolted to the wheel. So it's just a different style brake that ours doesn't have. You can see there's some other variations, right? And there's some more detail on some of these as well. So looking at but initially we can find it in figure 1 here. We have item number 31 on figure 1. And item 31 on figure 1, 6633, our lining, is shown here. And you can see it is dashed in a couple dashes on our column. So it's part of overall the main gear, tire, wheel, and brake installation. Okay. And, now all these, there is the effect from and to. Down below here, you can see none of these items have effectivity next to them. And when it's blank, it means it's the item above, right? So our lining, the 6633 here, is indented 2 spaces. It's got the 2 little dots here. So it's part of kind of the general like brake assembly right here, okay? Which is the first one that's indented 1. And then that is indented 1 from the main gear, tire, and brake installation. And you can see that the brake assembly, right, still doesn't have a separate effectivity here. So it gets its effectivity from up here. And so this style is effective on aircraft 001 through A001. And so you need to kind of know what is that range. Well, that is basically all of the aircraft. Okay, that's all the aircraft they produce. If we go up to, there is a list of effectivities up here. Can't remember how many pages in it is. I'd have to, where's the effectivity list here? Oh shoot, it jumped back down on me. Here's the effectivity list. I can't remember where they put it in this manual. I know it's in the AMM. It's at the beginning of the AMM. There we go. Whoops. I know we can go back to the AMM to look at the full effectivity list. But on here, essentially, it's the group that was before they added A's to the beginning of their serial numbers. So later versions do have A after the serial number. So the effectivity is, all models prior to I'll just put that in quotes, A serial numbers. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and, so this one, you'll need to use this manual to do B right here. You probably also can use this manual for C. We talked about that briefly early on. And then when you get down to number 2 here, I'm going to let you kind of figure this manual out on your own. You're going to use the Continental Aircraft Engine IPC to answer the following for the O200. And so again, that is listed. Here's our O200 IPC on the course page. It's also available on the Tech Ops library. So go ahead and spend about we'll take about 15 minutes for you to continue working on this.